It's 7:33, and I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. First item on our agenda is public comment. I guess, Jen, have you received any emails from any of our constituents as to wanting to speak or speak tonight?
No, I have not.
Okay. And is there anyone in the waiting room?
There is not.
Okay. Well, then we'll move on to item number 3, which is to receive an update from the Oxbridge Building Committee. We have with us tonight Duke Deneen, who's chair of the Board of Ed, and Kip Coons, who was one of our Board of Selectmen, and the two of them are still continue to be co-chairs of the Oxbridge Building Committee. So, we spoke to them a couple months ago about putting together an update and presenting it to our board tonight, so we all can have an update on kind of how that project is progressing along. So I guess Kip and Duke, I can turn it over to the two of you.
All right, thank you very much. I think that you all hopefully received the Excel package that I sent out to Jen this morning. And if we can put that on the screen, I'll go through it relatively quickly for you. This is going to be basically a financial review rather than looking at bricks and mortar and all that kind of stuff. But the first thing I wanted to go through was an overall cost review to get everyone's focus as to where we are, how we got where we are. The budget that we have for the school is basically divided into 2 parts: construction costs and soft costs. The construction costs were basically covered by our guaranteed maximum price contract, the GMP, which was signed in January of 2021. I've listed there what is in the contract itself, showing trade contract and allowances, general conditions, the contingency of the construction manager at 3% of his number, $1,428,000, performance bond insurance and their fee for a total of $50,820,000. As a way of reference, when we first put this together in August of 2020, we were estimating that the number would be $55,691,000. We were surprised with the very aggressive bids by subcontractors, and we went through them all, qualified them all. And so we were very pleased to have a benefit there from what our estimate was. In the area of soft costs, we have 3 components that comprise what's called the architect's cost of work. There are the architect and engineering fees. There's the furniture, equipment, telephone and technology equipment. The reason that these were adjusted recently, and I have the footnote A says they were adjusted in December of this year, is because they were never fully bid out, and now their estimates are being put out to the state and to the contractors. So this is where we are right now with the contractor's cost of work. We had a whole slew of other fees, bond counsel fees, termination of solar contract, et cetera, and we've come up with a total soft cost of $5,697,000. If we go down scroll down the page a little bit, if you could help me on that, Jen, or can I do that? I can't do that. You have to do that. Our original soft cost budget back in August was $5,693,000, so it's very close to where we were originally. So if we look at the total project, we have a guaranteed maximum price contract for our construction side, our soft cost, a total of $56,788,000. We have a 4.5% contingency fee on top of all of that. So we're at $59,343,000. That's our budget. We went to the RTM back in 2019 and asked for an appropriation of $63 million. So we're pleased that we came out far lower than our wild guess at the time. Our combined contingencies that we started with were almost $4 million, as you should see there on the page. So if we go to the next page, I'm going to give you the rundown on our current status. We go to the top. Our construction phases and timing. We've broken this project up into 2 phases because we have a very constrained building site. The academic wing, which is being constructed now with a revised substantial completion date of May 14 of 2022. The plan is for the students to occupy this wing at the start of the school year next fall. And the 9 ELP classrooms that are being constructed will not be used by the ELP this first year, but will be used as temporary cafeteria, gym, media center, etc. As of the end of November, this phase is 68% complete, with the site work and landscaping 73%. The assembly wing, which comprises the cafeteria, the gymnasium, and the library, with a substantial completion date of May 31st of 2023, we haven't started that at all. The demolition of the existing school was planned during the 2022 summer recess. As far as payments, we've paid a total of $19.7 million to the contractor, to the construction manager, and almost $3 million to all others. We've approved a payment in early December for additional $2.7 million to ONGAP, for a total really of about $25 million, which will be the December payment will be made by the end of this month. All the payments to ONGAP, we have a 5% retainage, and all the payments by ONGAP to the subcontractors are released against lien waivers. This is critical, and it was a subject of the problem we had with the Mather Center project. Spending versus plan. Okay, the GMP included a list of specific expenditures that might be required. This list was designated as allowances and totaled $310,000. And as of Friday, we spent $220,000 of that $310,000. Proposed change orders are the PCOs are the most significant variance. The change orders are classified as approved and potential. The latter being changes that are being proposed and are under review by the subcontractors involved and or the architect. The PCOs will reduce the contingencies of either the owner or the construction manager. So as of the end of Friday last week, the balances as shown are $3,306,000 compared to where we started at $4,294,000. The changes, or what occurred, why do we have these called $900,000 charges, are all provided on the next page, which is the PCO log. And rather than carrying you through all the detail, I suggest that you look it over when you have a chance. But there's no question that we spent a lot of money on all of the electrical work, the water work, all of the stuff coming off of the highway coming down to the school. I think that the engineer that SLAM hired probably didn't research clearly enough the requirements that Eversource would ask for, that Aquarian would require. And as a result, I think we've spent probably $200,000 in trying to solve all those problems out of our contingencies. Another contingency that is significant is when we were unable to get our roofing materials on time due to a backlog of materials at Johns Mansville, who was providing the roofing materials. We had a 4-week delay, which held up everything. And as a result, we are estimating that that's going to cost us an additional $90-some thousand. Those are the big things that have happened that have caused the changes that have eaten up part of our contingency funds. We made a change in the design of the wall of their gymnasium, I think for the better, which is going to cost us about $100,000. But all of that's detailed on this rather complex sheet. I invite you to look at it, and please get a hold of us if you have any questions. The final thing I want to tell you about is the rather mystical thing called state reimbursement. We originally were told by the state that this project, which was approved at $63 million, would have a certain level of had a potential for a certain level of state reimbursement for eligible expenditures. All well and good, but the fact of the matter is that the state has a very complex formula you have to go through to figure out what is actually allowable before you even get to eligible. We built a school that much larger than is required in our maximum projected student population. And the reason we did that is because the site is so tight, there's no room to expand this structure. So the conscious choice was to build extra space, extra classroom space in this building to accommodate future needs, as well as to accommodate, for example, when we have the improvements being done to Royal, Hindley, and Holmes, where we might have to bring some students over to this school while they're doing some construction work at those schools. And also there's an opportunity to, if you will, centralize all of the DLC in this school. So we built a school larger than the state would normally allow for 578 students. And this rather complex little formula tells us that our 109,000 square feet that we're building is oversized from the 76,000 square feet that the state would allow for reimbursement. So therefore, we know that we have a reduction in any amount that we're ever going to receive from the state. And if we go down a little bit, the numbers will show up here. We take the formula of what our contract was, less contingencies, our soft costs. So we have a total adjusted cost of $55 million. The most we can expect from that is 69.33% or as allowable, which would be 38 million. And our reimbursement rate as determined by the state for the town of Darien, because of our wealth factor, is 10.78%, which means to say that we maximum possible state funding for this project, if we bring it in at those numbers, would be 4 million and change, or about 7.5% of the total adjusted cost. So that's the report for where we stand. We're still, I think, doing well. Our use of the contingencies early on for all of those utility, whether it be water, electric, and all those adjustments, that's past us. We don't see a lot of wild changes going forward. We've made the architectural change in the wall of the gymnasium, so we think we're on pretty solid ground, and we feel comfortable with what we've got left in terms of contingencies, and we're certainly we're beating the time budget pretty well. With that, I'll take any questions.
Hey, Kip, it's Jim here. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very helpful. Going back to, I think one of the numbers you showed on the first page was, when we originally went to the RTM, we saw $63 million worth of approval, because I think we needed to get the town's approval absent any state funding. Is that correct?
We needed the town's approval because you need that before you can even go to the state and get in line to be considered for funding. Correct.
Got it. So we still have, I mean, even though we're getting a little bit less state aid than we expected, we still have plenty of bond authorization, to pay for, well in excess of what we need, right?
Well, I don't know what you guys authorized, but I hope you do. We certainly have 63
we
million.
authorized 63. Yep.
Yep.
Any other board members?
Yeah, Kip, I just am curious. I see the Alertus lockdown system as one of the changes on the, is it under changes on the PCO log? And I'm just curious because that name rings a bell. And maybe Duke, am I crazy? How did that come about, or can you explain that?
Well, the Alertus system Mike Lynch wanted to have the same lockdown system in Ox Ridge as he had in all the other schools, which makes a lot of sense. And when we first put this out for bid, the provider of the system did not step up and respond. So we had to go through all this nonsense of getting the revised look at the thing, and it came back with too many things. And Mike Lynch said, wait a minute, let's get it under control. Here's what we're going to build. So that's been finally put together in a way, and we now know what it is. It's a total of about $85,000 for this lockdown system. We had originally put aside under the bucket called allowances, $60,000. So we have another $25,000 in the change order to complete the system, okay? But it is now fully scoped out by Mike Lynch and the district, and it's compliant with the other systems that are being put in the schools, other schools right now.
They were existing in the other schools, right? I was just concerned because I remember hearing the commentary last time we talked about this, is the provider wasn't, yeah, like you said, wasn't responsive.
It was not.
Are we really comfortable, or are we going to see this come back as like a complete changeover of all 7 schools in the next?
Taylor, no, this is we're aligning with the system that was approved for the other schools. That's what we're doing.
So it's not like the legacy existing.
No, if you remember over the summer, we actually went through an appropriation. We went through a process to upgrade the system at all the schools. So this is the system that was approved and that all the other schools have installed and have been trained on. It's just, to Kip's point, the original bidder did not come in. And so the goal was always to align with Alertus, which is where we went with all the other schools.
Okay.
Anyone else from the Board of Finance?
Looks like John.
Okay, quick question. I know you're getting hamstrung by the state's formula, but as the school populates further and you fill up more of the classrooms, is it possible at all to go back and resubmit the formula with the larger occupation?
Well, as I understand it, John, and believe me, this is kind of like going into the depths of the IRS code. You make your statement early on, you do a study looking out 8 years, and you say, okay, here's my study that says, here's my maximum population that I expect in that 8-year time frame. And that was 578, which included, by the way, 150 ELP students. I think that when the state gives their approval, they base it on what you submitted at the time. To the extent that we're going to, and they told, we went up to the Office of School Construction Grants and Review, the famous office. And we said, we're going to build a school that's going to be larger. What are you going to do to us? And they said, you can build a school as big as you want. We're only going to give you money based upon our standards. And I think it's pretty much set in stone at the time. Now, what's happened furthermore is the head of that office has been dismissed. And so the new guy is in charge, and he's up to his neck in trying to figure out what's going on. But according to our sources, he pretty much is following the book because he doesn't have any other choice. He's just trying to get things through. So I very much doubt, John, that we're going to be able to get, and after all, it is not a lot of money we're getting back from the state one way or another. And the question is, how much effort and energy do you want to put into this to get maybe a couple $100,000? I'm not dismissing a couple $100,000, but we can do better by saving $100,000 here and there, rather than beating up the state and going through all of their bureaucracy and regimens. That's my opinion. But
It's also legislative, and it goes through the legislative process and the budget process. So, once they go through that process and then send out confirmation letters of what the reimbursement rate is, I think you're done for that specific school. It'll be interesting when we go down the path of these other 3 school renovations to see where we may have some opportunity, knowing that we're probably going to have an increase in population just based on the development projects going in town. So something to think about when we go to the next project.
Thanks.
Okay.
Kip,
Anyone else from the
how
Board of
mu-
Finance?
Yeah, Kip, how many more steps do we have to go through before we see any money, or what's the timeline for that?
Well, as I understand it, with every payment that we do every month, which is submitted to Jen,
Right,
the payment documents like 295 pages long, that Jen can tell me. And then she will submit that to the state saying, okay, we're looking for reimbursement on these payments. And
Mhm.
they'll take their time and review that. With regard to any change order, which is what the PCO log is talking about,
right.
all of those changes will be submitted by our construction manager, O&G and AP, and they'll submit them to the state to get approval of those. So it's a long process. I can't tell you, maybe Jen can tell you if she's gotten any money back from the state at all.
We have, and actually I have to give credit to the Board of Education staff. They're the ones who are putting the packet together and submitting to the state. So far, we've gotten about $790,000 back.
I'm just amazed.
I think they're submitting quarterly.
Okay.
The state actually wanted periodic submissions. So we do expect to have a pretty consistent flow of money coming in.
I will say this, the town of Greenwich, when they did the high school,
You
they
skipped
failed
it.
to follow these procedures. And it was like 5 years after the school was built that they finally settled up with the state. So we're way ahead of the game. And we were alerted to that process. So we're really on top of it.
Yeah, but this is something that we should bring up to our legislators just to correct the process, because having been through it 7 or 8 times myself, it makes the IRS code look simple.
Exactly. It makes the IRS code in oil and gas area look simple. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thanks to Kip and Duke for coming
Oh, yeah.
tonight. It was thorough and concise, which is a very challenging thing to get right. You guys nailed it. So thank you very much for the update and for your respective leadership of the board in this project.
Well, thank you, Dan. But I will say that Amy Samuelson of SLIM helped me through that wonderful network of understanding the state's rules on allowable space. That was really something. Okay.
Well, Kip, thank you very much. Duke, thank you guys very much for the time tonight.
Thanks.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thanks, Kip.
Thank you.
Okay, so guys, next stop on the agenda is going to be to discuss and take action on the proposed bond sale. You know, we've been talking about a bonding coming up in Q1 22 for a while here. You know, Jen has worked with our outside municipal bond advisor, Munistat, to put together a number of analyses. I'll turn it over to Jen shortly, but just as we kind of go through the 3 different analyses that she sent around, just know that there's sort of 3 things that we sort of need to decide and discuss and decide tonight. One is going to be on the ultimate size and structure of the bond sale. That's how many, how much we'll be raising in bonds, based on all the different projects that we have outstanding that have been approved for bonding, and the structure, and that is whether it's a level debt service, level principal, and how we actually amortize the debt over that period, versus starting right away, year 2, year 3, so forth. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen, and I think is Mark on the phone?
Yes, Mark Chapman is with us. He's been our financial advisor for the town for several years, so he's well versed in our bonding. As Jim said, first item on the list is the size of the structure. In the memo that I sent you, I explained that Oxbridge is the bulk of what we're looking to finance right now. And based on the information that Duke and Kip provided regarding the state reimbursement and some information that I received about current Board of Ed projects, I sent out a revised estimate of what's left to bond on Oxbridge. So if we take their estimated total construction cost and back out what we've already bonded, what we got as premium, and used towards the project. State grants we've already received, what we still expect, a reallocation of unused bond proceeds from other Board of Ed projects and expected utility rebate. The remainder to be bonded on the Oxbridge project is $28,481,971. The other items proposed for the bond issue are active projects that we have. $5,000 for Highland Farm just to finish up funding the phase of that project. Some sidewalk repair and replacement, various capital projects, the bulk of which is the high school tennis courts. Getting started on financing some for our sewer engineering, and all told with the revised Oxbridge amount, the recommended size is $30,785,000. I don't know, Jim, do you want to talk through the size first, or do you want to go through kind of through size and structure and then have discussion?
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit through this about the size here on the second page. If you all see of Jen's memo here, she lists each of the individual projects, and you can see in like if you work from the right hand side of the page, the third to the right column is how much we expect to bond in February. And then the second from the right column is how much will be left outstanding. So you can see this has been slightly updated. So these numbers are off a bit, right, Jen?
Right.
So, we're expecting to bond 29.8, and based on these projects, we'd have about 3.5 million still left to bond on those projects, most of which have to do with the sewer engineering and the sidewalk replacements, as well as the Royal roof.
Hey, Jen, the $1,001,443 recommended on the sewer account.
Mhm.
I guess I could have done, how much of that is to eliminate the cash deficit?
About half of that. We've spent a little over $500,000 to date. I asked Ed what he expects to spend in the next 12 to 18 months. He's actually expecting about 1.5 million worth of expenditures. So I wanted to cover our cash deficit as well as give us a little bit more, but I didn't want to borrow too much because this project would be eligible for ARPA funding.
Right. So is funding the deficit eligible for ARPA funding? Or is it just future? It's projects.
So we incurred the expenses that we've incurred so far. Some of them were before March 2021, which is the start date for
Yep.
ARPA expenditures.
Yep.
So there is a portion that wouldn't be reimbursable by ARPA anyway.
Okay.
So that was kind of the one that I struggled with the most. because
Yeah,
of that
yeah, obviously
eligibility.
you certainly don't want to bond something that we're going to get reimbursed for through some other means.
Exactly.
But you're comfortable with this level.
I am, because I also didn't want to assume that we would use ARPA funds towards this. So trying to strike that balance.
Right.
And I think, Dan, from a size perspective, we're still leaving $1.3 million outstanding.
And that's for known sewer projects, and we may be discussing more given the stormwater issues we've had going forward. Yep.
Right.
Exactly. So that's about $1.3 million out of our ARPA grants, about 6.3, Jen, 6.4.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
I feel like we're leaving enough behind, Dan, to be able to, if we wanted to use a significant portion to still be able to tap into
And it also doesn't hamstring us to necessarily use ARPA funding.
Right.
Right. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Kind of along those, just before we change subjects, along those same lines, the one right after the sewer upgrade line item, the Royal roof replacement. The notes say that we're waiting to issue until the project is fully underway. It looks like we've spent some money. Is it really not underway?
They've just begun the design. I don't have the update from Mike Lynch handy, but on school projects, because there can be shifts in what the state reimbursement is, there's there can be delays in getting approval from the state for various projects. I prefer not to issue in advance of the funds being spent. We have funds in the general fund that can carry the cash needs. And then we can reimburse ourselves. I prefer on the school projects to do it more on a reimbursement basis.
Okay, thanks.
And Taylor, I think the other thing is in some of these projects, that they're not that far along yet. They sometimes come in far below what they expected. So I think waiting ensures that we haven't raised too much debt.
Right.
Okay.
So in terms of the sizing that we're looking at in terms of proceeds, it's just
Can I ask
under.
a question? Sorry.
Yeah.
One more. Hey, Jen, on this spreadsheet, middle of the page, premium allocated to project. So the Oxford is like 3 point round up to 8. What is that?
When we did our issue in the spring of 2020, we got an enormous 3 point whatever million dollar premium. And so we had nothing else to use that on. We didn't have issuance costs anywhere near that. So we applied it to the Oxbridge project, which just reduces what we need to borrow in the future.
Okay, thanks.
And just as listeners, we talk about these, the upcoming bonding size here. When we talk about size, it's always the proceeds here. So to the extent we're looking to raise $30 million in bonding, it could end up being $26 million in bonds and $4 million in bond premium. So, which is what happened, a year and a half ago. So, Jen, do you want to have Mark walk us through his different analyses?
Sure. So Mark, I've provided to them the 3 pro formas that you provided to us. So we have level principal with no deferral, level principal with 1 year deferral, and then maximum deferral and level debt service. So can you walk through those and hit the highlights?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Sorry, we're not in person. Things are you have to be flexible and nimble and be able to adjust in a quick time frame. So in talking to Jen about this, we just kind of went through the scenarios. I guess we'll start with the maximum deferral with the level debt service. So when looking at these 3, we're serving a couple different masters, and we can't really get too creative in Connecticut in regards to how we structured that, which, in my humble opinion, has served our municipalities well, so that we don't get too creative and start, deferring principal out 30 years and those types of crazy things. But they all serve a different purpose. So obviously, like your home mortgage, if you defer payments and you don't make payments for a while, and you do level principal or level debt service, there's costs associated with that or added interest expense. So the level maximum deferral, which is deferring principal for 2 years and then doing level debt service, is pretty much the most we can do in regards to pushing out the debt to help us get over our current peak, and still allowing us giving us capacity for future debt issuance. But with that, there's an added expense. So you have to balance the short-term benefits, budgetary benefits versus the long-term added expenses. But when you amortize that, roughly $1 million added interest expense, you're amortizing that over 20 years. So it really doesn't, it isn't, $1 million to me is a lot, but it's scope of these size of projects. There's a purpose for it. And I think, Jim, you had a question in regards to average life. So for that one, the average life would be about 12 years. So that's kind of on the long side. I don't know if there's any specific questions, but you'll see I'm on page 3. We have the current budgeted debt service is 10.1 million. It dropped down if we do nothing to 9.6. And when you add the debt service for the school and the other town projects, we're basically going up about $100,000 from last year's budgeted debt service versus when we add the new money. That's going to be slightly higher if obviously the amount is higher because of, I think it was 950,000. Jen, is that correct adjustment? But it won't really move the meter. There's not that, when you average that over 20 years, it's not really it's maybe $2,000 or $3,000. It's not that bad, or 20,000, excuse me.
Just to pause there, Jen, yeah. Mark's going through the third proposal.
Correct.
In the order we got them, right?
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Still,
so that's the third. It's the final proposal that Mark is going through. The first, and then the second question, Mark, is that I think your assumption here was that this would be 10 basis points more expensive than the other two proposals.
10 and about 10, yes. And that's just because of the duration.
Because we're deferring principal longer, so it's a longer duration.
Correct.
Okay.
And what was the differential on the average life between the, what in our book was level principal with no deferral versus
so it goes from
maximum deferral,
from 10 and a half for the no deferral, 11 years for the 1 year deferral, 12 years for the maximum deferral.
It was 11 years, 10 and a half, 11 and 12.
Correct.
And so basically that shifting of a year and a half on the yield curve, we're saying costs 10 basis points. Right, Mark?
Yeah, and it's part of the formula, because it's awarded on a true interest cost. So it's part of that formula. And these are conservative numbers. I added 25 basis points to the current rate for February. Not to get into the municipal market has been pretty steady, even though the treasury market's been going up and down, kind of like, depending on what's in the news every day. But the municipal market's been pretty steady. So if things remain steady, these numbers, there's some assumed bumps in the rates there.
Would it be safe to assume that the lowest TIC to the town would be the level principal no deferral?
Yes.
Because it's the shortest life?
Correct.
Thank you.
I think, Mark, one thing I found I kind of focused on when I looked at these three proposals, because to give a little bit of background here, the town had up until, I think 3 years ago, only ever issued 20-year level principal, no deferred amortization, right?
Yep.
And so what happened was, I think if everybody looks at page 4 of any of the packets, but I'm looking at page 4 of the maximum deferral level debt service, you can see that graphic there. Our debt service hangs around 10.5 million for a couple of years and then trails off dramatically. If you go one page prior on page 3, you can see that under the maximum deferral level debt service, that the change in our annual debt service is $100,000 in this upcoming fiscal year that we're about to start budgeting for. If you look at I think what was the first proposal in the pack that Jen and Karen sent around, where we had no deferral and level principal, since we began amortizing effectively 1/20th of the principal in the first year, you can see the debt service jumps up by 1.6 million. So on a $150 million budget next year, if we were to go with the no deferral, that would add approximately 1% to last year's budget. As opposed
Incidentally,
to,
that's almost the difference in the difference in total interest, cost. So you're paying for it up front, in essence.
or amortizing it over kind of 1 to 2%, right?
Right. And that's, Jim, that kind of brings us to the second one, right? It's kind of in between the two. Where in essence, you have the same increase in 23, roughly 100,000. And then, it's level in 24, but then you have the drop off in 25. So when you defer it by that 1 year, you have that capacity just because your debt service is dropping off. That's kind of why I threw that one in there, that scenario, just to give you options. And I'm not sure what the timing is on those other schools, so I think we probably want to make sure we have some capacity down the road.
And I think, as you all are aware, there's a construction committee that's been formed to evaluate the removal of the portables at 3 different schools, which in total is estimated to be around 75 million. So if we think forward towards, whether it's 12, 18, or 24 months from now, having to issue additional debt, to cover those costs. If you think about, $75 million worth of debt at a 2% interest rate, that's about $1.5 million of interest per year. So to the extent we need to leave room, and not start amortizing in the second year, but instead wait until the third year, that sort of allows a little bit of a cushion there, hole, to sort of accommodate additional interest on future bond issuance.
So Jim, just to translate that, what you're saying is by moving off of the no deferral to the 1 year deferral or the 2 year deferral, we're giving the town more flexibility to accommodate a future bond issuance, assuming it's within the next 24 months.
Exactly. So if you look at page 3 of the maximum deferral level debt service, you can see there's a $100,254 of additional interest in this year. And we can't avoid that, right? Because once we issue the debt, we need to pay for the interest. But what it does is by deferring debt service until the third year, it leaves 1.841 million of sort of otherwise naturally reduced debt service that could then accommodate additional interest if we needed to issue, more bonds in 24 months. And we would still keep us on a sort of declining debt service. So that's one of the things I found attractive about the third option.
The 2 year deferral.
The 2 year deferral, yeah. Well, yeah, which is first principal payment within 36 months.
For modestly higher interest expense.
Yeah, it's a little bit higher cost and a little bit, the debt's outstanding for a little bit longer, which means we pay a little bit more in total interest.
Do the agencies care about whether we're deferring for 2 years principal payments versus not deferring?
They do not. No, your debt payments, because they still are sort of front loaded, you're over the median in regards to debt repayment. I don't have that figure at my fingertips, but you're over that. You're close to 70% in 10 years, I believe. If not even more, because of the level principal, and then the last, I think, 2 or 3 bond issues, we've gone with the level debt service because of the looming potential of the bigger school projects.
If you look at the page 8 of the analysis, this shows just sort of how, based on this debt issuance here, how our debt would grow from 62 to 84 million and how it would amortize down.
Level 8 of the max deferral.
Yeah, page 8 of max deferral. So to Mark's point, we're still cutting our debt in half in 9 years. And then page 9, as we think about the overall debt burden, if we look at it against the grand list, you can see we continue to move down from 70 basis points to 30. And then I think the one metric that we followed for the last 5 or so years has been, what is our debt service as a percentage of total expenditures on page 10. And you can see that continues to decline.
And the rating agencies are focused more on these types of figures than they do the pay down. They do look at that, but in Connecticut, as long as you've got to really try hard. You can't be less than 50%, no matter what structure you go to. So you're good in that.
So just to be clear, the max deferral leaves us with higher outstanding debt at the end of 10 years. But the point you guys are making is still well within any kind of, criteria for the ratings we're accustomed to.
Correct.
So the trade-off is modestly higher interest costs, modestly higher end of 10th year debt level for some flexibility in the first 3 years.
Exactly.
And I think, Mark, we always have the ability, right, Jen, after we get over the Oxford bonding and the 3 elementary school bondings, if that was to come forward, we always have the ability to have new projects only bond them over 10 years if we wanted to start kind of bringing down our average life, right? Repaying debt quicker.
Right, we could choose to do them as a shorter term if they were small projects or shorter life projects.
Bond counsel, if you're buying fleet vehicles, they're going to tell you the useful life is inappropriate to go 20 years for something like that. But all these projects are 20 years, no problem. If you want to pay them off quicker, there's nobody stopping you to do that. And it just becomes more of a budgetary question than anything else.
Jen, should we assume you're comfortable with all 3, or do you have a preference?
Sorry, I prefer either of the 2 deferrals. I don't have a strong preference for either one. I do not like the no deferral just because of what it does to the 23 budget.
And what's the additional interest cost of the 2-year deferral versus the 1-year deferral?
That's approximately $1 million.
Okay. Between
Your scenario 2 and 3, I
okay,
think,
that's the million.
over the course of 20 years.
Yep.
So basically, we're freeing up $1 million of debt service in fiscal 24.
Yeah.
And sort of in repaying it over the next 18 years.
Jim, I'm fine with either of those deferral alternatives. I'm kind of indifferent between the two, candidly. If you have a bias toward the 2-year deferral, then that's fine also from my seat.
I guess when I think about this, to share my opinion with the rest of the board to me, it's really dependent on whether or not we think there's going to be a lot more bond issuance coming down the line. And so if we didn't have a potential for having to issue another $75 million of debt, in 12, 18 months, depending on these projects go forward, I'd probably go with the 1-year deferral. To the extent we think it's likely that those 3 projects go through for a total of $75 million. It seems like that would be this would be a way, the maximum deferral, the 2-year deferral would allow us to avoid, having a $1.5 million step up in debt service, and hence the budget in our following fiscal year. So I don't know if do people on the board have other thoughts on, either the 2-year or 3-year deferral? Or I should say 1 year or 2-year deferral?
Jim, I'm kind of fine with either one of them. I'm kind of a bit leaning toward the 2-year deferral, I guess I would say. If I had, if we took a vote, I'd probably put 2-year.
Jen or Mark, could I get you guys to answer something for me? It looks like when we assess the grand list total, it's set at a smooth growth rate of 0.5% per annum. But we do have those 3 projects coming online. So is it possible that within the next year or 2 that the grand list growth would actually exceed the 0.5% that's shown in this pro forma?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. We just had to make an assumption, and until those projects are online, we won't know the real impact.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That's just what I was thinking. If you're looking, it may be a small consideration, but if you're looking at a consideration for the 2-year deferral, that sort of ties in that revenue stream with the onset of the interest payments or debt and principal payments for the 2-year deferral option. It ties it more closely.
And Mark and Jen, the numbers that you ran here under all 3 of these scenarios, you applied that deferral and that type of debt amortization to both the 22 and the 23 bond, right?
Yeah, I kept the structure consistent for all 3. So the way the first, this year's bond issue is done is the way the next year is done. Just trying to keep it consistent. You can get kind of lost in the weeds with doing it 1 year this way and next year. Just trying to, I think the $3.5 million next year bond issue is really not moving the meter as much as obviously the $28 million Oxbridge issue.
Mark, does a gap ever arise in market appetite between these 2 alternatives, or not really? Not
really, no, because we're we're only, from 10 and a half to 12-year average life. And, the quality of your paper, your street recognition in the market, the amount of, there's going to be high demand for however we structure debt service.
Mark, in terms of where we typically see the premium bonds, is that typically in the first 10 years?
Yes, typically it's before the call. So we've been, I believe, the last 2 or 3 bond issues anywhere from 6 to 8 year call. So we'll see the premium in that short end. And one thing, you talked about, you opened up with the proceeds. So it's the par plus the premium equal proceeds. And one of the questions Jen asked me was, rather than you taking, so if you borrow 30 million and you get 3 million in premium, you in essence get 33 million. So can we could set up the notice of sale to say, no, we want 30 million of proceeds. So you won't get 33, you'll just get the 30 that you need for the bricks and mortar. Just round numbers. I'm just using round numbers, which in essence will be, you're borrowing, you'll have less principal outstanding, you're borrowing less, and you'll have less interest expense.
Okay.
Which doesn't have to be decided tonight. I'm just throwing it out there. It's one way to avoid those large premiums. And it will be large, anywhere from, $1.5 to $3 million of premium, based on what's going on in the market right now.
Yeah, I do think we want to try to target an overall proceeds here because, too large. I mean, if we just raised the 30 million in par and had $3 million worth of premium, that would effectively be pre-funding our 2023 bond proceeds, right?
Right.
Is there any role to be played here on like an outlook on rates? And do we want to talk about that as it relates to the premium strategy I think that if I'm not too rusty, I'm thinking it makes sense to push for the longer deferral and the longer duration in a rising rate environment, right? Or am I nuts?
That question for me? Anybody? Yeah, based on the last Fed meeting, they're talking about raising rates. It doesn't necessarily mean that the municipal market will move lockstep with that. But I would never tell you to create projects to borrow for, but if you have projects and you're going to spend this, borrow as much as you need, because it's a good opportunity at the lower interest rates to do that. And I've been saying this for a while. Rates only could really go up from on the municipal side. And just because they raise the short-term rate, quarter basis point, 25, 50, doesn't necessarily mean the whole curve goes up like that. It'll probably flatten a little bit on the short end, but I think if you have these projects and the cash flow says these amounts, then I wouldn't hold back. I would probably borrow for that. But don't go out creating stuff. But I think it's an opportunity. Timing is ripe. There are call provisions, so if rates go down in 5 years, then we always can call them and refinance them at a lower rate. But this is pretty cheap money right now.
Okay, so guys, in connection with the fact that we have to sort of discuss and make a recommendation on size and structure, does everyone feel like they have enough info here?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm happy to make a motion here, but my recommendation, I would say, is that we go with Jen's recommended size, which is approximately $30 million in total proceeds. And it sounds like we're we're leaning towards the third scenario, which would be a maximum deferral of principal, not paying principal until the third year, and then level debt service for the remaining, for the balance of the issue.
So Jim, that's captured in the revised version 2 resolution to sell that I sent out today. So if we approve that, the only 2 blanks that we need to fill in, it's the total issue of $30,785,000. The bonds will mature on February 1st of each year, beginning 2025 if we do the max deferral, right, Mark? And then we
All right,
also,
correct.
as part of this resolution, need to designate a Board of Finance member for
Hey, Jen,
the,
do we need to tweak the language in the resolution? Because right now it says shall be issued and sold as 30,785 rather than shall be issued and sold to generate 3785 in proceeds. Sounds like the actual face value of the bond will be lower and sold at a premium.
yeah, I think that would make sense to reword that.
So can we say shall be issued and sold to generate proceeds of
Yep.
30,785,000?
Is it no less than or is it precise?
I believe it has to be precise.
Okay.
And it might not be to the exact dollar because the premium, when you do the adjustment, I would say no less than, because that's what you
Okay.
need for the bricks and mortar. We can confirm that with Marie Fallon, but I believe.
So why don't we, so we'll reword it, issued and sold to generate proceeds no less than 30,785,000. I'll run it by bond counsel, and if they're uncomfortable with it, we can come back at the January meeting and do a new resolution.
I guess, Jen, Mark, we should always be fine if we have like a $5,000 interval, right? Because that's one bond.
Right.
And do we need to formally recommend a specific structure this evening?
Yes, that would be part of the resolution where we say that the bonds will mature on February 1st of each year beginning. It
Okay,
would be 2025 for the max deferral, 2024 for the 1-year deferral.
Yeah. The only thing that's not in there, Dan, is how the bonds will amortize from that first amortization date in 2025, to the maturity date. So I think the consensus among the board seemed to support the level debt service.
so are we actually just voting on the resolution as we agree it to be worded?
Yes.
So the only other thing, as you said, is that we need to have a designee.
Correct.
I nominate Jim Palin as designee.
I'll
Well, do
second
you want-
that.
I think
Well, we'll go in reverse order. So I guess all in favor of yours truly being the Board of Finance nominee?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's unanimous. And then can I have a motion to approve the resolution as amended to read proceeds rather than par of 30,785, or as Jen is advised to deal with rounding issues from council?
so moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 That's unanimous. Okay, Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, next item on the agenda is to talk about budget assignments for the upcoming budget cycle. I sent around to you all before the meeting some suggestions on budget assignments. I think before we talk about that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about process and timing, and then we can talk about budget assignments and and certainly have a follow-up after this meeting. So I'm going to throw something up on the on the screen here. Can everyone see that? Okay,
Yeah.
so what this is here is I worked with Jen to kind of put together a combination of our regular meeting schedule plus our budget specific meetings, and then thread into it the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen budget schedules. A couple things to kind of point out here. The blue is the Board of Ed budget. The blue are Board of Ed meetings. The pink is Board of Selectmen meetings, and the white unshaded ones are our Board of Finance meetings. Okay. As you can see, the Board of Ed is going to kick off its budget by presenting when the superintendent presents his budget to the Board of Ed on January 6th. And then they'll have a series of meetings, that start with an all-day Saturday meeting and so forth, where they'll run through their entire budget. Just a couple weeks later, the town administrator will present her budget to the Board of Selectmen on the 24th. And they'll also have, a series of budget workshops where they run through all of the different departments in that budget. The dates that I would point out here that I think are important are on February 1st, the Board of Ed has its only public hearing on the budget. And subsequently on February 8th is when the Board of Ed actually votes on its budget. The day before that, you can see on February 7th is when the Board of Selectmen vote on their budget. So those two budgets will be finalized by their respective boards on February 7th and February 8th. You will see a little bit further down this calendar here. March 1st is the date in which the budgets are formally presented to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed. Now, we will obviously have them beforehand because the two boards are expected to vote on them on February 7th and February 8th. And I just point that out because as we get a little bit further along in our Board of Finance review of the budget, we begin our workshops. We have our budget work sessions, I should say, on March 27th, March 29th, and March 31st. Those are the three meetings where, our board will go through all the different aspects of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed budget, discuss it as a board, and prepare ourselves to ultimately vote on the budget on April 5th. So just note that we shouldn't be waiting until March 1st when we formally receive the budgets to start reviewing them. They should really begin by tracking the Board of Ed budget when they start discussing it in the very beginning of January, and the Board of Selectmen when they start discussing their budget in late January. Any questions on this calendar here?
Jim, on Jan 11, I better put my glasses on, excuse me. On Jan 11, the Board of Ed, there's a note that says meeting with the Board of Finance. Who do you envision in that meeting from our board? Is that meant to be the entire board? Or is that meant to be the budget designees?
So I think, obviously all members of the Board of Finance are welcome. This is the meeting when the Board of Ed has finished going through the budget, or I should say having the entire budget presented to them. And then this is usually a meeting where they allow the Board of Finance and RTM, Education and F&B committees to ask questions that they have on the budget. So I think what we will be working to do is, Dan, myself, and you, or possibly others will work to kind of collate any initial questions that our board has and get those over to Duke and Dr. Adley as soon as possible so they can begin to incorporate them in any answers that we need, or any questions, I should say, that we have into their feedback there. I reached out to Duke and Dr. Adley, and we'll kind of coordinate exactly how they want to run that meeting. And so as that date gets closer, we'll discuss how we as a board give them feedback. I think two things, Dan, you bring up a good point that we should keep in mind here. The Board of Ed votes on their budget on February 8th and the Board of Selectmen on February 7th. If we have questions or concerns or sort of areas that we want them to, to look at deeper, we should be giving them some of that feedback before they actually vote on the budget. So as these budgets come out, I'll be reaching out to all of you to kind of develop feedback and sort of gather input in, probably at or before or at our January 8th meeting, so we can then formally move that to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed. So there's one other schedule we put together. Give me 1 second here. This is the other document that I sent across, which is my first stab at assigning all of us as the primary on different areas of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed budget. Okay. On the left, I've broken out the Board of Selectmen's budget into approximately 10 different categories, which are all foot with different areas that you'll see in Jen's spreadsheet, and you'll see how the Board of Selectmen actually discuss it when they review the budget. You can see in most cases I've assigned 2 members, in some cases 3 members of our board to be the primary on that. And as a primary on these areas, your responsibility is to kind of watch the Board of Selectmen and listen to the Board of Selectmen's review of these different areas, come up with questions and so forth, and ultimately research that area of the budget so that you can present that to our full board on the data on the far right-hand side of this table here. And the way we're going to go about this is, again, for each area, I've assigned 2 or sometimes 3 different Board of Finance members to kind of work together. The idea is that on each of these areas, by the date, for instance, on general government, Dan and Paul will work to pull together questions along with their respective RTM committees who are also assigned to that budget area, and get those questions or additional data requests to Jen and Kate by March 7th. So at that point, Jen and Kate can work to combine together any questions that the RTM or the Board of Finance has. They can begin to work on responses and or go to the various department heads if they need more data and get us answers back well in advance of the date that the Board of Finance sits down and we have our budget workshop and actually review that topic area. So the idea is we ask questions, we get a pull of all of our questions together between when the budget's released and March 7th on that area, give them to Jen and Kate along with the RTM questions. They solicit feedback, and then the members of the Board of Finance that are responsible for that area of the budget will be prepared to talk on March 22nd, as will the members of the various RTM committees to the extent they have comments or opinions on those different areas that they want to share with our board before we ultimately vote on the budget in early April. And as you can see which area you've been assigned to and when the intended date of the Board of Finance review will be. And so as we get closer there, if people need to shift things around, we can talk about that, but we should lock that in, relatively quickly after the budgets come out. So let me pause there and see if any of you have questions on the proposed, kind of budget breakdowns here.
I just need a little clarification, Jim. What exactly falls into community environment?
That's actually very little. It's beautification, monuments and ceremonies, grants and celebrations, and the harbor master.
Jim, I
That's a great
assume,
partner.
under Board of Education, you wrote all, meaning all of us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the point there is I listed 4 of us and then all. And I think the thinking is that, obviously the Board of Ed budget occupies approximately 75% of the overall town budget. So this is something that all of us should be aware of and should be following closely and so forth. I listed 4 of us who can be the 4 primary ones that are organizing questions from the rest of our board to funnel back to the Board of Ed and to the administration to be asked. So while myself, Rob, Taylor, and David will be the 4 primary on that, it's really incumbent upon all 7 of us to make sure we're all on top of that budget. We're all aware of major initiatives and what the spending looks like, so that we're all prepared to talk about that on the 31st. But there will be 4 of us that will serve as the lead. What I've tried to do is sort of mix up some of the pairings that we've had in the past to give people a chance to look at new areas of the budget, and some areas of the budget where there traditionally only been one person looking at it. Like that service, I've added a second. David, you and I worked together on that. So we don't need to necessarily vote on this. What I would ask you all to do is to sort of think about this. If you have any thoughts, or just shoot me an email and we can talk about it, and we can always make adjustments to this. But the most important thing is once you have your assigned area of where you become primary on in the budget, that we work very closely as the Board of Selectmen roll out that specific area of the budget, that you stay on top of it, and we start preparing any type of questions or additional data requests that we have, so we can get those to Jen and Kate by the dates shown in the second to last column from the right, so that they then have time to combine them with any questions that our counterparts on the RTN may have, so we can get those to staff, get those to Jen and Kate. They can work with staff to pull together all the necessary answers. And then when we come back, if to the extent we still need to have a call or a Zoom with staff to kind of dig deeper into an issue or so forth, Jen and Kate can work to set that up. But the first, Jen and Kate will be our sort of primary go-to on questions we have on the different departments. And then they'll work with staff or set up a call if need be. So I'll reach out to Jack on this and work with him and some of the other Board of RTM committees to find out which committees will be assigned to the different, and be reviewing different areas of the budget, so we can kind of coordinate getting questions to Jen and Kate with them. So the big takeaway is don't plan a lot for January, February, and March.
Thanks.
I think the other feedback from last year's session, right, which was the first one that was all done remotely versus in person, was that I think some of our RTM colleagues felt that we were gatekeepers rather than just partners in their process. And we want to make sure that that doesn't occur, that they feel like their voice is being heard and not being edited. So I think this process as it unfolds in the spring should be mindful of that.
Exactly, Dan. And I think that this will allow them to sort of engage at the same time with us on different topic areas. It'll allow Jen and Kate to sort of take the culmination of questions that we and the RTM have, organize them into, if you will, sort of a single set of questions, and so that they're only going to the various department heads and staff, if they need be, sort of once, and, you know, or a little bit more efficient process in terms of making sure that staff can continue to do their jobs and at the same time answer our questions. So I don't know that we have anything to vote on as relates to the department budget assignments, but if you guys have any questions, you know, certainly drop me an email and we can talk about it. Or if you don't like your buddy, you can drop me an email and talk about it as well. So next item on the agenda is the financial report. Jen, you want to take us through that?
Sure. I feel like a broken record. It's really not very interesting. Property taxes are doing well, consistent with prior years. That being our main source of income, that's always a good thing that we see that they're coming in as expected. On other revenues on page 1, I'm going to continue to show you what the park program fees are versus their budget. Through November, they had collected $630,000 out of their $665,000 budget, because they continue to have a high level of registrations and interest in their programs. So more than likely, we will again be going through an appropriation of the excess revenues, because with all that interest in their programs, which is generating a lot of revenue, they also have additional costs above what their budget is. So we'll be monitoring the expense side and come to you as needed. The town clerk has taken in 80.67% of their budget because of the volume of real estate transactions. And then on building permits, we budgeted $379,000 for the redevelopment projects. Actual received year to date is just under $127,000. So on the monthly reports, I'll keep that as a running item as well, so we can track what we're actually taking in on the redevelopment projects.
Hey, Jen, given the, I understand the expense issue on the park and rec side, but given the level of fees that they have already collected and anticipating that the spring and summer sessions are fairly robust sessions for participation in programs, do we ever revise upward the expected revenue numbers?
That's what we did last year. We increased it requires board action, but we use the increase in the revenue as the funding source to increase the appropriation on the expense side. So we increased both sides of the budget rather than saying we're going to draw from fund balance, even though we know that we're bringing in additional revenue. In the budget that you'll see for fiscal 23, we are recommending creating a special revenue fund for their program so that we don't run into this problem in the future.
Okay.
On the expenditure side, there's nothing unusual. Everything's tracking as expected. Big item for Public Works is snow, the upcoming snow season. So we'll see how that goes and how it impacts their overtime. Police Department overtime for now has been okay, but they do have some vacancies. They were about to get up to a full complement, but I believe they've had now a resignation. So they're going to continue to carry some vacancy there. And while that saves us on salary, it does increase overtime costs.
So on the legal side, is the bulk of this difference versus the 5-year average the retainer? Or is that?
Yes, because what we show is for the current year is encumbered. And when we compare that to prior years, if it wasn't expended, it doesn't pull in as prior year. So the fact that we encumber the full retainer bumps up our current year number.
Okay.
On page 4, we have our summary of state revenues. They're coming in well and as expected. We have that tiered pilot that we did not expect. That's going to give us some additional state revenue. And the big number for special ed excess costs, we really won't know until we get to February.
Jen, do we know how much the Board of Ed put in for?
I do not know. I can ask them.
Okay.
I mean, how much they submitted?
Yeah, there was the first filing is on December 1st when they put in their list, how much their list was, and then we can do the calculations from there.
Okay.
Thank you.
On page 5, we have our contingencies and our reserve accounts. The only thing that's still pending is middle of the top row, the Board of Finance Capital Reserve. As of November 30th, the BOE insurance claim was pending, but it has been approved by the RTM. So your available balance in your capital reserve is $253,000. On page 6, the sewer fund is doing well. Collections have been as expected and consistent with prior years. On page 7, we have our parking fund. We're keeping our eye on this because the permit renewals have come in really well. We had assumed 75% of our fiscal 19 actual just because we weren't sure what the COVID impact would continue to be. But we use that same methodology on our other revenue sources. And while parking permits have come in much better, pay station revenue and ticket revenue is significantly below that. So the revenues into the parking fund are lower than we would have expected. And with the current COVID uptick, I'm not expecting those to go up anytime soon. But we are still incurring expenses. So Kate and I have been talking about this one. We're keeping our eye on it, and we'll probably be coming to you with either some transfers or some other solutions for this fund.
Jen, what are the tick up in expenses? And should any of those be adjusted based on the lower usage of the lot?
Well, one is that we have 2 positions. One is allocated 100% to the parking fund. One is split 50% between the parking fund and the general fund. In the budget, it assumed that the one that is 100% to the parking fund it was vacant at the time that we put the budget together. We assumed that it would not be filled for the first half of the year, but because of a personnel issue, some changes needed to be made, and that position did get filled in July. That's one solution that Kate and I are looking at, is to transfer from the general fund where that salary was originally budgeted and move some money over to the parking fund to offset the impact of having to fill that position sooner. Other than that, there's some requirements by the state to begin opening up the station, which in the past, I think a vendor took care of that. There's no vendors who are willing to do that. So we may incur overtime to open up the station. So really there's some ongoing normal expenses of operating those lots that Kate and I need to look at and decide what can be done. Because the revenue it's not there from the pay stations and the tickets. And then the last 3 pages show our active bonded projects. Most of these that show a cash deficit are going to be cleaned up with the bond issue that we just discussed, as well as probably providing a little bit of future cash for them. But most of them are moving along really well. The home's roof and skylight, the Board of Ed has told me, is complete. They're just waiting to do final closeout documentation, and they expect it to come in around $745,000, but I need to reconcile that with them because we've spent more than that to date. But it will be significantly less than the 1 million that we had budgeted for that. And then the Hindley roof replacement is also nearing completion and expected to come in well under the $558,000 that was budgeted for that project.
And Jen, the excess on the home's roof and skylight, that is or is not baked into the adjustments to the, to our bonding.
That is baked into the adjustments. So on our Oxbridge, the amount we needed to borrow went up significantly because the expected state grant went down, but part of that was offset by planning to reallocate from homes and Hindley roof projects. And that is all that I have on the financial report.
Okay, well, next are special assignments. I guess Dan or Dave, anything to point on, to report on Oxbridge or the newly
Actually,
created?
Yeah, we gotta-
minutes.
Nope.
This is my big moment, Jim. You're robbing me of it.
Hey,
Worked hard on these.
okay, November 16 minutes. Everybody was here except for Mr. Hendrickson. Any comments?
Actually, Jim, I just have a quick question. I watched the video just to compare what was written with what actually transpired and so on. Does the video become incorporated in these minutes at all? I mean, how do the two relate going forward in terms of providing a record of proceedings?
The official record is the written minutes. The video is something that we do in addition to that.
Okay.
Okay, so if there are no comments, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from November 16th?
Moved.
Dan, moved? Can I have a
Second,
second?
second.
Rob? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those against?
Abstain.
Okay, so that would be 6, 0, and 1, Jen. Motion passes. So now on to special assignments committee reports.
The only thing on Oxbridge is it sent a note out. There is a tour on Thursday, this Thursday at 2:30. I've heard from Taylor and David that they're interested in attending, and I've forwarded your names to Katie Lublin, who's coordinating that on behalf of the committee. So if anyone else, I think they'd like to have a head count. So if anyone else is interested in attending, let me know now or just shoot me a note.
Dan, my apologies. I sent my response either to Jim or to Duke.
Oh, okay,
Should have included you. I'll be there.
great. Okay,
Okay,
so Taylor, David, and Paul. I'm TBD, depending on some travel. We may or may not be.
okay.
That's it.
Hey, David, anything on the new elementary school?
No, unfortunately, we're off to a bit of a slow start. We are still looking for town volunteers, architects, lawyers, people with contract experience, anything like that. If you know anybody that would be willing to put their hand up to serve the town, we could use it. Obviously, we want to get this project moving ex post haste, but we need a few more bodies.
Okay. Rob Cardone, anything on technology?
No, nothing. We met, feels like a month ago, and we've kind of lost a little steam. So I'll follow up. Okay, see where we are. I'm hoping for a meeting in January at some point, keep this thing going a little bit. Okay.
Okay. I guess I can report, I guess from audit, Jen, it looks like we are nearing completion here.
We are. I signed the management representation letter on Monday and returned that to them. So now it should be going into final production. I reviewed the draft a couple weeks ago. So after we get the final, we should be able to file on time by the end of December, and then we'll set up a meeting with the auditors and the audit committee.
Okay, and all that should be done and ready for a February bond issuance?
Yes.
Okay,
Hey, Jen, are you the only signature on the management rep letter?
No, it was myself, Kate, Dr. Adley, and Rich Rudel.
Perfect. Thank you.
okay, I think that's it for special committees. Chairman's report, I'll keep it short. I think, this meeting was a good bit of prep to get ready and get organized for the budget season. I just remind everybody that, it's going to be incumbent on us to all stay on top of all the budgets, and to follow both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed as they sort of build out, analyze, and sort of ultimately vote on their own budgets, so that we can all be very prepared and very informed as we, as a board, start debating those and analyzing those in March and ultimately vote in early April. So my recommendation to you all is make sure you set aside some time on the weekends or nights to start watching a lot of these Vimeo meeting tapes, so we can all be, again, be very informed and develop some very thoughtful questions ahead of those two boards' debates.
Jim, could you send us your slides of what you recommended the meeting schedule plus our assignments?
Yes, I will. Any other business?
No.
Okay. Well, with no other business, I guess I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Rob Cardone, Paul seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, everybody, take care and have a good holiday.
You too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.